we have to think about the long history of women's health research and funding, why we got marginalized. I mean, even to this day, I think I get sometimes a pejorative glance from someone who thinks this is still a pink science. And thank goodness we're entering a, new revolution of femtech and all of that. But why didn't the female brain get put into the MRI, the maternal brain more specifically, until recently? There are real barriers and there's stigma around these topics.
Hello and welcome to the Empowered Woman podcast. This week, I'm honoured to be joined all the way from New York by the woman responsible for reviving and bringing life and meaning to the term matrescence, Dr Aurélie Athan. In this episode, we talk about the origins of the word matrescence, society and culture's role in shaping our view of motherhood, and how matrescence offers us a new framework to explore the real experiences of motherhood. Aurélie, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, The Empowered Woman. I want to start. Tell me about you and what you do.
Oh, okay. Well, it's delightful to be here and to meet you and to hopefully educate your audience. So the way I would do that is a combination of my background, which is a clinical psychologist by training, but I'm also a research professor and educator at Columbia University.
And we'll dive straight into it and then I'll work backwards then from that. So what is matrescence? When does it begin? When does it end, or does it end? Tell me all about it.
Sure. So matrescence, as I see it and research it and study it, and also I am now at the intersection of psychology and reproductive health. So I'm going to zoom out when and zoom in from that perspective. So simply, matrescence, like adolescence, is what we sort of created as the slogan because immediately your mind should be comparing two different human life passages. Many of us remember what adolescence is, and I want you to think of matrescence as a potentially a second puberty. So what happens? Right? What happens is a holistic 360 change in your life, that is potentially for the transition to motherhood initiated through a biological pregnancy, though that's not always the case. I believe that matrescence can still occur, whether through surrogacy or adoption, in the many ways we invite a child into our life.
Yeah.
But if we were to say biologically, we are going to start with a cascade of hormones and things that start to morphologically, physiologically, structurally change the brain and the body. Right? So you're going to have a lot of those changes. Then we're going to move into psychology, but I actually want to skip over that for a minute.
Okay.
Though we can say things like mood changes, um, reactivity and sensitivity, um, things like sleep changes, all of the things that kind of the brain and the mind start to shift around. Then let's go into the social changes.
Yeah.
And I want you to, the whole time I'm talking, envision a pie with each slice of the pie around this holistic change. In terms of the social piece, you're going to experience changes in your peers, your parental relationships, and your partner relationships. I want you to remember the awkward time of sitting at a cafeteria table when you're a teen. I bet you that's happening as a mom on those trying to find your mom groups and who's going to be your next mom friend. You may experience dynamic changes with your parents, either distancing or wanting to have more closeness and perhaps forgiveness of old hurts. And your partnership is going to undergo change. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Should I keep on going around?
Yeah. Keep going.
Okay. So I'll do a little bit of a more brief overview. So think biopsychosocial and beyond into ideological change. So we're going to move now into financial.
Yeah.
You're likely going to experience some changes in your professional life if that's what you've pursued, or the ways in which you economize your home and the finances that you bring, or the advancements that you, especially for this podcast, many women start to think about their professional ambitions and also whether they need to change them in terms of flexibility of hours to be home or not. As a teen, you might have started to say, okay, well, now I have to contribute to the family home in different ways, right? I might have to have a paper route, whatever. Your economic
Yeah.
standing changes. And with that, you might also start to experience maybe a political awakening, a social justice awakening. Teens start to think about things of fairness. A lot of women within the domain of work and home start to think about things like fairness that might happen around like gender, distribution, or it might be about, oh, I just got passed over for a promotion when I was about to go to maternity leave, right? And then you start to think about these issues of fairness. And you think about also things like, depending on where you live,
Mhm.
Ireland or anywhere else, what is what are the people in power doing structurally to support through maternity leave, through childcare policies? And of course, then we start having moral awakenings too. Teens start to think about as well moral conundrums, right? Like who should have, who's the haves and have nots. Well, moms start to think in this way too. They might have to turn off the TV because their heart hurts when a child is hurting across
Mhm.
the ocean in a different place. It's like time and space collapses, right? That child could be my child. And that brings us into existential considerations like, oh, life and death, right? So teens actually, moms and teens do different things with these pieces of the pie. This is a great example. I think teens do more risk taking when they start to want to defy death
Mhm.
and take the risks, right? And start to individuate away from home and all of that. And I see women sometimes um, actually taking less risks, right? They might not do that skydiving trip
Yeah.
when their kids are, littles, or they might actually start to constrain and reprioritize things and think in very long term ways, like 7 generations, right?
Mhm.
Like, what's my legacy? What's the
Yeah.
generativity that I have here? And as we're turning this pie and this wheel of life around, this tree of life around, these are branches on a tree, we may also start to have a shift in values. And
Mhm.
through those shift in values, we start to make different decisions. And we go into the last maybe wheel here, which is spiritual and religious thinking. I hear teens maybe wanting to adopt what they learned from their parents or completely go God shopping, as I like to call it, right? They go into search, they experiment, they test out things. That is true of moms too. They might want to differentiate from their family of origin. They might want to pass on different values, or they might say, "Oh, I this was really important, and I want to transmit that too." So this is not just a one and done, and
Um,
I'll just address that. There might be an acute phase
mhm.
after birth, or the preconception to conception to first 2 or 3 years of life. But I'll tell you, this is a 52 card pickup. You're gonna, like, toss all the cards in the air again, perhaps with each kid who has a different temperament. Mothering 2 is very different than mothering 1. And then as they
Mhm.
mature and develop, it's a co-developmental process
Yeah.
where, raising a teen is very different, and if you're raising a teen also as you're exiting your reproductive window in terms of menopause. And then we can then say, does it end with empty nest? When they leave, does it begin again anew around grandmothering? So
Mhm.
these are the questions we're researching. But this is the end of the lecture, and we can go into a beautiful dialogue from here. But that's I don't have a sound bite. I want to take you on
No.
a journey that this is
Yeah.
truly lifelong.
And I mean, it's huge. It affects every aspect of our being. And I only came across the term a year after having my little boy, so about 3 years
Mm.
ago. And I'm like, how am I only hearing about this now? How did I not learn about this in my biology class, alongside adolescence? It's just like, how is it only now?
Yeah, it's really disappointing in a lot of ways, right? Because the most common refrain in how I was even launched into the work and initiated was in, private practice, hearing them say,
Mhm.
why didn't anybody tell me? Right.
Yeah.
And thank goodness I was situated within a school of education because I was able to hear, why didn't anybody, instead of hearing, why didn't anybody warn me? I really heard, like, why didn't anybody prepare or educate me? So I always see this from the point of view of education and the power of
Yeah.
education and literacy. So why is it not in the textbooks? Well, we have to think about the long history of women's health research and funding, which I'm sure you'll have experts around that too, why we got marginalized. I mean, even to this day, I think I get sometimes a pejorative glance from someone who thinks this is still a pink science. And thank goodness we're entering a, new revolution of femtech and all of that, for better or worse, right? But we are there are scientists, right? Why didn't the female brain get put into the MRI? The maternal brain, more specifically, into the MRI until recently. There are real barriers, and there's stigma around these topics. I mean, I just came from a conference talking about menstrual health and why are girls not even able to kind of openly say during their physical health class, you know, I'm on my period, I'm menstruating. I would like to opt out of the swim class. Right. So there's a kind of culture of silence. And I think we're hearing it now because the zeitgeist, and it's because of folks like you and everybody who's saying, say it,
Yeah.
name it. We have to name it to tame it. And for me, the power of words, the way that I had to break through the cultural silence around this was to come up with a word that was developmental. And I can
Mhm.
say more about that.
And tell me, like, how and when you came across the term.
Yeah. So, um, again, I'm a clinical psychologist. So I am, in my PhD program, I am being trained in pathology. I'm being trained to diagnose when things go wrong. And that's appropriate. However, in every other class, whether it was for children or for teens or for geriatric populations, I had to learn what was normative and expected before I can start to say, when did things go wrong? So we talk about developmental psychopathology, big old word to just say, how do we go awry? How do we get off track? And what is the track? Like, what would be
Yeah.
expected? Like, a kid can walk and talk within bands before we get worried. Some do at these ages, and others do at those ages. So I would raise my hand and I would ask, like, well, what is normal? Because it sounds like it's a pretty big life change. And thank goodness I was steeped in human development. But still, adult development was still very nascent. We kind of thought that you finished your identity building in the
Yeah.
teen years. Um, and just to rewind, I skipped over the psychology piece of
Uh-huh.
that pie because I wanted to use the word identity,
Yeah.
which simply means the me that's looking at this everywhere all at once, like the movie title that I've, not said fully, and said, "What's going on with me? Is there something wrong with me, or do I have to
Uh-huh.
make sense of this? What do I have it to compare to? My peers, what the textbooks say are normal." So I knew that we needed to have something, again, not normal, but normative. I think that's a more neutral
Mhm.
term because it's sort of, what we know. If we look at groups and groups and groups and groups and groups of people and samples, diverse samples, hopefully more and more diverse samples, we can see what's expected in a way.
Yeah.
Not the cultural ideal
Mhm.
that has unrealistic expectations, but
Yeah.
we look at a population science and epidemiology in a way. So anyway, I would raise my hand. My professors didn't have good answers for that. So when I finally graduated and had my own lab, long story short, I was already an interdisciplinary thinker and I was going into other fields. I went into anthropology and I found Dana Raphael, who coined the term in the 1970s. She also coined the term of doula, which many people know and use um, very well. But I would say that probably only the midwifery and the birthing community had this word still in operation. It had gone dormant, it had gone asleep like
Yeah.
Ophelia. It was not a term that anybody knew. And I was studying spiritual awakening in women with reproductive cancers. So I found an article that was matrescence like transcendence, like the transcendence of, was a thinker who was thinking about spiritual matters. and that was my area. And I thought matrescence was like the word transcendence until a student said, "No, Dr. Athan, matrescence it's more like adolescence. It's a maturation process." And by that point, the penny dropped, the light bulb goes on, the
Yeah.
shoulders drop, and we go, "Oh." After, we did a scoping review of 30,000 articles, on mothers, and the trends were always child outcome. We were only interested in her in terms of if she was unhappy, we looked at if the kid was not doing well at math.
Yeah.
We saw it only from if I said depression, postpartum, you would say depression.
Uh-huh.
So there are biases. There's a lot of bad ideas. This was
Yeah.
a good idea, but she had not developed it. It stopped. It went to sleep. It was like moss, that retracts from,
Yeah.
the water. It hadn't been watered, and that's where we took over.
And what drew you to that? Like, what made you go, wow, I need to bring this back?
Well, you know it when you see it, and I think that very same cascade that I described over my own body
Uh-huh.
of, "Oh," that happens to mothers when I say it. Why? Why do we know it when we see it? Because you can understand that the storm and the strife, this upheaval, this psychological, social, ideological upheaval are things that happen in life and death situations. You would
Yeah.
confront that if a spouse died. We know that this happens, but we were never permitted to be anything but perfect in the role. And so we
Mm.
weren't allowed to see it from a place that was maybe messy at times and required space
Yeah.
to iron out and to figure it out. And we gave that to our children and we give that to lots of other vulnerable populations. We say, of
Mm.
course, a drama just happened. We need to talk about it and figure it out. So I knew it immediately just from a scientific point of view. It had all the markings of a human life transition. And the word, like adolescence,
Yeah.
said it is a maturation process, a human maturation process. Yeah.
And so naming it, actually saying the word matrescence and that it's a transition that we go through, what does that word and that language do for women?
Words are incredibly important. I don't want to overuse this phrase. I always say words create worlds. They
Mhm.
do. Words limit, right? We
Yeah.
know the
Mhm.
limitation of language. We know what can happen when we misname things,
Yeah.
just like to call something, it can stigmatize, it
Mhm.
can narrow, it can point us in this direction instead of that. So I
Yeah.
knew precision in language was very, very important, and we had to get more precise. And I also understood that it was a language that opened something up. Like that parable, the you point to the moon and the fool looks at the finger.
Yeah.
I don't want us to look at the word, the
Yeah.
finger. I want us to also look at the moon. What is it pointing us to? A
Yeah.
much larger science. It's going to take 100 years or more to really lay this down as it did for adolescents when they thought kids were going crazy on the way to adulthood. The word, it's not like one and done, now magic, we got it. But it did
Yeah.
open up what we call a framework. It gives you a new framework to now interpret information differently. And I really want to lean in on this. Interpretive
Mhm.
frameworks are incredibly important, right? We now can see the disorientation of a mother and we can interpret it differently. We can ask more questions. And I think this is no more evident than in the neuroscience. The neuroscientific community may have been looking at it just once, let's say the maternal brain,
Mhm.
once, see a cross section in a one time point. And if you looked, you'd just see a pruning and you would see like a shrinking, you know, structure. I'm butchering this in some way, but just to paint a picture.
Yeah.
But maybe we switch to gardening in the natural world. But if you come back 3 years from now, you see actually that this was a tuning and
Yeah.
that it grows back. differently and perhaps even more robustly because it was adapting. So,
Yeah.
with the word maturation, we have to bring in the word adaptation. And adaptation is a long term word. It means it takes time and we
Yeah.
have to see it over time. Even if there's regresses, we know with kids, they can slide back 2 steps forward, 1 step
Mm.
back.
Yeah.
But that's what the natural world does when it grows.
And so not every woman experiences it in the same way. And not
Mhm.
every, I suppose, brain adaptation will happen at the same pace. And so we'll all have a different matrescence, I suppose.
Please keep on saying that over and over again. Though there are universal principles and they are driven, let's say, the biological piece by hormones, and we're all different, just like in
Yeah.
menstruation, we all have that fingerprint. Though there is a kind of universal process. The same with birth. Birth is like a fixed action pattern. We can
Mhm.
predict it. And that's why even doctors can like tinker and give you these medicines, right? And it's like cooking,
Yeah.
right? There's a fixed action pattern to it and there's a universal quality to it. But each of us, oh my goodness, there's so many variables that go into it.
Mhm.
And then we are individuals.
Yeah.
So many of the models I was reading about is that you're expected to, there's one universal M mom with a capital M. That's what I say in my class. Where we wouldn't say that to a teen going through adolescence. Yes, everyone will go through an adolescence, but we expect Jack and Jill and everybody else to come through in their own way
Yeah.
and to still be Jack and Jill, but evolved in a different way.
Mhm.
And we are all expected to be molded into one universal ideal.
Yeah.
And what's really important for when I talk to women is that, yes, you're going to have a sense of loss of self, loss of identity, needing to rework those things. But there is also a through line of you. You're an
Yeah.
individual and you're going to do this your way. And the same thing with teens where you have growing pains and gains. Talk to bring 5 teens into your office tomorrow. And though they're going through a universal experience, one feels the impact of social media stronger than the other.
Yeah.
Another one, their parents and them are in greater conflict. So our pain points are very going to be very individualized. And that's what we call individual differences. And that's important.
And when Dana Raphael first coined the term, motherhood looked quite different in that, we live in societies now where mothers were fed narratives about bouncing back, getting back to work. You can do it all, you can have it all, you can be it all. So obviously that impacts on our experience, on our transition. In your opinion, are women having a harder time nowadays, or is this just a new adaptation process in the development of this term?
Mm. I wonder that too, if both can be true. One of the reasons I love studying reproductive health psychology at large is because it changes with every generation
Mhm.
and geography. Every 20 to 30 years, I
Yeah,
mean, even the technology is changing like our phones,
I know.
it's updating, right? So our mothers didn't have IVF in the same
No.
way, right? So even just that example alone, um, the pressures to be in the workplace or even
Yeah.
not the pressures, but literally the power and the
Mhm.
access to be able to do that. So all of those variables again are certainly going to change with where you are. I always teach with make a cross like historically along the timeline. Are we talking about 1950s? Are we talking about 2050? Right? It's gonna right when geography, thinking about that vertical line, where in the world are we talking about? Because some of the things that are operating, let's say in the Western world, are still being figured out in some other places.
Mhm.
So if you start thinking that way and you go, well, then then what's interesting about this story? I think there's two things. It's constantly evolving. And so
Yeah.
you better stay on your toes. Don't ever think that you've got this pat because look at AI revolution
Mhm.
tomorrow may change the nature of work. It's going to affect the nature of reproductive
Yeah.
experience for women and what decision they're going to make. And then, on the other hand, I think that you have to ask, well, then what is specifically unique for our time period? Because there's going to be books written on
Yeah.
motherhood. I mean, go to the feminine mystique, right? It is, you feel like you're hearing yourself thinking out loud, but
Hmm.
with different problems to solve. So
Yeah.
here's what I think is the unique problem of maybe specifically, and I think we have to get really specific as I'm becoming increasingly a cultural psychologist as well. Like what's universal across the world and what's kind of specific, right? So I would say that in the kind of modern Western world with highly educated women and emerging adults who are starting to think about whether they even want to have kids or not, this is
Hmm.
also like a huge thing, right? 'Cause low fertility is
Yeah.
here. Where women in the past started their families early, and perhaps even too early, if you want to say it that way. And that's even, I'm sorry to get too nuanced and, talking like that, but right. So we're having our kids later,
Yeah.
and we're doing so while also continuing to develop ourselves personally and professionally. And what I've noticed is that as the identity formation becomes more and more fixed and you kind of know who you are, you have to keep an eye on whether it's also becoming inflexible because a child introduces stress and it introduces then a change, just like, let's say, marriage. The you and
Hmm.
me has to become a we.
Yeah.
And that requires adaptation and flexibility. I think the universal claim across history and time is that it will always require adaptation and sacrifice.
Yeah.
And where those sacrifices happen for the self or for the family or for the workplace, that's where things kind of change a little bit. So I work with women on a case by case basis. They really have to think about that question. And a lot of them, the perfectionism in places where they don't have any government support, right? Where they're not like wagging the finger and saying, hey, where's my childcare? They start to think I have to become even more self sufficient, more perfect. And I think this question of how can we become interdependent in a healthy way, in a mutual way where we all get to thrive. My child gets to thrive, I get to thrive is the big, I think, is the big project that I think our mothers and our mothers' mothers and our mothers' mothers were trying to do because they got totally sacrificed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're in quite a unique position, having, revived this term, brought it back to life, and having all this research and doing all this research at your fingertips. Is there anything in it that stands out to you in a surprising way or like in a hopeful way?
Yeah, I mean the uptake, plain and simply the uptake that women themselves have done where they've understood it almost immediately. They've taken it upon themselves. There has been a call to action around it. I think at the beginning, there were always people knocking on my door who were curious, but they were also kind of mavericks, of their own making. They were thinking differently, like Apple, Steve Jobs. They were already thinking differently about this, and we met. And now it's mainstreaming in a way that has really surprised me. I didn't think I would see it in my own lifetime in quite the way, like the lid popping off. Yeah, I thought this was at least a 30-year progress. Yeah.
Wow. That's quite
So,
incredible.
yeah, it is. It is. I think we need to take like a pause and really take that in. But it also casts a shadow. I don't want it to be too quick. I don't want it to be a fad. I don't want it to be a trend. I don't want it to be a feel good movement. And I would say that Dana Raphael was very concerned about that as well. She had long, she was ahead of her time. Talk about a maverick, really ahead of her time. She didn't get to develop this idea, but she started to go into even ecology in mothers. She understood that the minute you make it the moon, right? So I think I said, let's not stay on the moon. She understood juvenile justice had to change if you do
Yeah.
adolescence.
Yeah.
The time when we take adolescence seriously, the policies become serious. We change the start time of school so that we know the teen brains need more rest. We take it seriously. We take it rigorously. So I don't want this to be something cute,
No.
because it's going to come back and bite us in the tushy,
Yeah.
right? It'll just become another product to sell a mother,
Mhm.
which is often also how we become taken upon as consumers. This has
Yes.
happened like in the environmental movement with greening. Now we
Mhm.
buy our organic diapers. I think this is more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. And I think it's the language. So using the language and developing the language around it, but then the culture. So I like the culture that we live in is not set up in a way for women and mothers to thrive. And so it's like we need to start taking that apart. And then matrescence will help us inform the taking apart and the rebuilding. Is that kind of what you mean?
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's going to be a dismantling process. There'll be a parallel process of that liminality. You know how women,
Yeah.
the disorientation is because you're dismantling structures that no longer serve you. That's why we get angry. We get
Yeah.
upset. We feel the
Yeah.
sad under the mat. And
Yeah.
then we have to get organized and actionable on that. I agree. I think that matrescence has to do a human developmental process to the structures of society,
Yeah.
or else we'll wait till our daughters and allies do it again for their and they will. It's never done. You see, the seeds, like civil rights movements, the seeds of that kind of progress got planted a long time ago.
Yeah.
And what is our responsibility? I have more questions than answers, and I put it to you. How do you see it? What would be the real responsibility of matrescence as you listen and talk with others? Do you have a clue?
At the moment, I think I am moving in the direction of a reorganization of society. Now, that sounds huge, but say if we start with at the family level, where if we need to go to work and we want to go to work, that our workplaces are flexible in a way that allows us to work. So we can work and we can be the mum that we want to be at the same time. Because I left my job as a journalist because I knew I would not be able to continue working the way I was and be the mum that I wanted to be. And I don't regret that decision at all because the journey that I'm now on, it's like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what needs to happen. And so that's kind of where I feel I need to do work. And so in coaching my clients, it's about talking about what supports they have and what they truly want, not what they feel they should be doing or what society says they should be doing. We have to have the house, we have to have the car, we have to have the good schools, all this sort of thing. Well, actually, what do you want? And what does that mean to you and mean for you? And so if we get, if women start thinking in that way, and I'm not saying that I want to tell women how to think, it's about them figuring that out for themselves. It's looking at the structures in society and going, well, actually, that doesn't serve me. And so, and this isn't an overnight job. I mean, you can't dismantle how we go to work every day overnight. But if we start having the conversations, and if more and more women start standing up going, actually, this is crazy. Like, I can't go to work 9 to 5 and run a household and mother my children, in the best way for my children. And one example that springs to mind is there's a group in the UK, I think it's called the 5 Hour Club.
Mm.
And she started posting jobs or getting companies to come on board with flexible working hours for women. And it's been really successful. And I think they've actually started posting in Australia as well. So it's starting to take hold. So I think that's the beginning of a restructuring of society in a way that better serves women. I think. The start of something, maybe.
Yeah, I really like the working at macro and micro levels. I agree
Mm,
that when you're talking to every woman has a dilemma that they personally have to solve and that
yeah.
it comes within, you know, but they don't live in a vacuum. And so they live in these
Yes. Yeah.
structures that make their life more difficult than it needs to be. And
Mhm.
then from there, you start to kind of envision and imagine a new world that you could start to kind of reform. And if enough of us do that, and I too, just to connect even to that last question, the other shadow side is not to become competitive around this. I really,
Yes. Yeah.
I may not be the mother of matrescence. I didn't coin the term or whatever. And I hope someone like, you know, gives the wand on my head and says, maybe you can be the godmother of matrescence. Like I want what's best for it, which
Yes.
is that it doesn't become another thing that becomes that we compete
Yeah.
around this process because it requires a barn raising, a real collaboration. It's
Mhm.
gonna require that tidal wave of enough people coming together,
Yeah.
and that's why, like we should all be talking with one another to envision and think about some of these solutions. They are, and they're gonna be different in different neighborhoods and niches and whatever, and, but there might be some universal things that rise to the top. Yeah.
And so then, like, you've dedicated so much of your working life to researching and developing this term. And, I know you don't want it to be a competitive thing or, to be the mother of matrescence, but we do owe you so much. So thank you
Mm,
for what you've
mm,
done. Um, and there's a job to be done now, like we were saying, about getting it into everyday use, learning about it and educating people. So, where do we go from here to ensure that it doesn't become that pink science or the, just another term that we use? Perhaps you could argue that maybe that has happened to menopause a bit.
mm,
What do we need to do now to keep this going in the right direction?
mm. Yeah, it's a tension, right, between bringing visibility and not over what's the word when someone's too visible? Like um,
Oh, yeah, it's
oh,
not overused.
overexpose it?
Overexposed. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You're almost gonna have to constantly make it unfamiliar again, because once make it too familiar and overexposed, it becomes ubiquitous and then becomes invisible. That's the same
Yeah.
thing with even motherhood. Like in my first day of class, I say, "Raise your hand, who here comes from a mother?" And they all like, "Is that a trick question?" Like, well, I didn't say if you know her or you like her, but like, do you come from a mother, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "Wow, this is like one of the most ubiquitous experiences, and yet it has receded into the background of our curiosity because it's a given."
Yeah.
So these are the tensions I think we have to revive, forget, revive. I mean, we become unconscious, we then have a crisis, we become conscious of it. I do want to give us some compassion that I think that's just the process of life. But how do we keep it like from a feminist framework? You want consciousness raising so that you keep it above the falling asleep around it too much and keep
Yeah.
it alive and keep building on it and all of that. So I don't know what others should do, but I know that what I've um, said my service should be, I think, is laying down those frameworks, as I said. So we have the word. Now we have to define it. Now we have to frame it. Now we have to say, this is what could be studied here. So what I've done is take that biopsychosocial model. And if I say each slices of the pie, in my lifetime, I'll never be able to research each of those slices of the pie. But I can give the biological to the neuroscientist, let's say in this case,
Mm.
not only, right? It's more than
Yeah.
just the brain. I can give the term to economist to look at it that way. And that's what's starting to happen, and I'm really happy about that. And then we can come around the round table in an interdisciplinary way. And just like there's a field of adolescence,
Yeah.
and that's what we mean by a textbook. You need a field first and then
Mhm.
conferences. Like how do you build the science? And this is all and the policy. This is what I know happens. You write papers, both in journals, but also public books, like
Yeah.
for the public books. You talk, you get it talking. Then people start to lay down some kind of more formal. ideas about it, more formal structures. You create conferences. You then get funding for it, and little by little, you lay that groundwork down. So for me, it's just bringing those frameworks so that other people can pick up their shovels
Yeah.
and do in their own yards what they need to do, but it's a different shaped shovel.
Yeah.
It's a different tool.
Yeah. That's really important actually to say that. Yeah. I want to just go back to the woman just for a moment. And you touched on the identity piece and that, you know, our identity might shift and some women might experience that identity shift and some women might not experience it. But as women, I think we go through so many of those shifts, you know, because of our biological nature and the cycles, you know, perimenopause and menopause. With the intersection of matrescence and perimenopause and menopause, I mean, what, first of all, does that happen? I mean, or does matrescence end and then you begin menopause? Or do we know, you know, can you still be in matrescence whilst going through menopause? And how does that then feed into our identity?
Mhm. Great question. There's a lot of complexity, right? I think that
Yeah.
nature actually holds that complexity. I don't think it's like a very linear, like this is done and then this begins.
No.
I'll take you to the science early on because it was actually much more in the earlier decades that you would have become a mother at 17 or 18, right?
Yeah.
If not earlier. But it would actually have been even sanctioned by the culture, right? To say, okay, you marry your high school sweetheart
Yeah.
and right? And you had your first kid, by 19. And was your brain finished changing by then? Or let's go even earlier to truly what we call teen pregnancies, right?
Yeah.
Whether stigmatized or otherwise,
Yeah.
where they're 14 or 15 and they're doing that. So certainly the instability and the mood instability that comes with kind of hormonal shifts, whether you're coming online with a menstrual cycle or you're coming offline with a menstrual cycle, is very real. And
Yeah.
we can see the dysregulation in both age groups.
Yeah.
And in this case, we're going to talk a lot about kind of late childbearing aged women who are just finishing their childbearing, maybe in their 40s, right? And already perimenopause is coming online. So
Yeah.
that is interesting and that needs, I think, a lot of study. Like, what is it like to parent young children when you're in perimenopause? We be parenting teens
Yeah.
when we're in perimenopause, and let's make a joke because, oh my god, what a hothouse that is, right? Where everybody, right? There we have, that's like a
Yeah.
double, yeah, a double bookend or whatever we wanna call it. So, these are kind of new trends. I like looking at new emerging groups. That's a new emerging group.
Yeah.
The, child-free by choice woman is a
Yes.
new emerging
Yeah.
group. And the single mother by choice is an
Yeah.
emerging group. We
Uh-huh.
used to call single mom and, it's lots of stigma, but now we have actively, becoming a mother, an independent mother.
Yeah.
So, these are the new frontiers and the new diversities that we're seeing within motherhood. Yeah.
And just finally to end, um, for anyone kind of in the depths of new motherhood, what would you say to them about this transition that might make it a little bit easier for them? Not to assume that everyone's journey is going to be hard, but we all have times where, you know, it can get a bit challenging.
Yeah. Oh, my favorite one is actually I'm gonna borrow it from a student who I wish I could remember who it was, who their mother said to them, because
Oh,
I get moms in my class too, right? Because they're in school or going back to school. I think her mother took her in her lap and just gently caressed her hair and said, "How's your ego doing?"
yeah. Yeah.
You know? Because the ego, not to say it's not only the ego that is striving and ambition, that's kind of
Mm,
the negative side, but ego simply means me. How are
yeah.
you doing?
How are you doing? Yeah.
How are you doing? What do you make of this circus?
Mhm. Yeah. What do you make of it? That's a really good question. Yeah. Yeah.
And ask again and again and make some space. Give her some time to get her reflexivity back up online if she has it, because there's so little time and space. And also be allowed to say, you might just be surviving right now.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to go into advice giving of what they should do. Yes, they should be asking for very practical advice, like make this meal, do this laundry.
Yeah.
But I think to just have that check in, just like you would with a teen, like, how you doing?
Mhm.
It's tough.
Yeah.
I can remember, but how is it for you? Not to
Mhm.
project your own experience onto theirs,
Yeah.
to bring their curiosity and also to back off if they just can't go there, because
Yeah.
that's another thing. I think it's until a parent has real space, maybe it's when the kids are going onto the school bus. There are, they'll know when the fog lifts a little bit
Yeah.
and they start to have that capacity to to do that inner work again,
To take a breath.
to take a breath. Yeah. I think the other thing that I would say in a kind of very, I hope it can be heard, is that we talk too much about the first half of the pie, the biopsychosocial. I think the ideological value shift, and especially for your audience who's thinking about work and all of those things, is that the value shift that happens in motherhood is not spoken enough. I
Mhm.
think even now, with the way the popularization of the term, I just see brain. I want to hear
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
and I hear brain and mood, but I want to hear mind.
Mhm.
That her mind is active, even overactive, and being creative. You're going to start to see really interesting things, whether it's entrepreneurial come out of you or it's questioning and curiosity, that your mind is having a worldview change.
Yeah.
When I say metanoia, it's a very important thing. That's why it's disorienting. The things you value, your point of orientation is changing. And with that, I hope that not only how's your ego doing, because it might feel like a death to self, but it might feel like a death in a way or dismantling to the old world that you created for yourself. And to be really excited, even though you can't quite see it yet.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like a volcano underneath. A new island is going to come. A new I dash land, a new land of me is
Yeah.
going to form in a new place. And what is it going to be? What an adventure. You're on
Yeah.
the Odyssey.
That's it for this week. If you'd like to read more about Matrescence and Aurélie's work, you can visit her website, matrescence.com. And if you're enjoying these conversations and would like support understanding your experiences, come and join us at the Women's Collective by BU Coaching. It's a coaching-led community that understands women and supports them to thrive in all seasons of life.